you balance your own interests against theirs. We think they are there to look after us. And that's therefore what I'm getting at is that nobody creates a facilitative environment for somebody else.
Sure.
Nobody.
That, I agree with that. But at the same time, maybe the problem is a different one. I don't know, because I don't want to believe that people in this room alone don't really see that or know that. I'm sure, this is what I was saying, when you are in a room like this and you are discussing, all those points come up.
Yeah.
They start blaming, you know, they know that people are there to look after themselves. People will not come and do things for you. This is, again, part of the debate that has gone on for many years.
But so young people tend to ask, they always say, people are not letting us do this, space is not created for us.
Oh, that's a problem. But people letting you do that is a bit submissive, you see. I think we need to tackle it differently, maybe for lack of better expressions of the way to define it and then put it correctly. There's something we need to tackle. I can't fully get to the cause of it. There is a sense of mediocrity.
So we don't believe in ourselves?
No. And we seem to, you know, every time to look to the other. And you see, interestingly, not to each other, but to the other. You see?
Yeah. I get
there's something, I don't know how, but even for young people, when in colleges and wherever they are doing their thing, their studies and so on, they are as good as any they find there from
often
other,
better actually,
or even much better. Yeah. But how this again, stepping out of that, turns to be something of, you know, they are still convinced the other one is better, even when they have proven they are better. I fail to understand this.
I think I understand it.
You will help me. You will help me.
I think I understand it in the sense that, and it's very scientific to be honest with you. I think over generations we've been socialized precisely not to believe in ourselves. We were told everything that we were was not good enough. That was the whole essence of colonization.
But we don't seem to believe everything we are told. So why did we particularly believe?
No. But you see, I think
why did we particularly believe this one?
I think
why do we choose to believe this?
This is where the difference between what we say and what we do comes in. Even when we say we don't believe, do we act as if we don't believe? Do we act as if we don't really believe we are inferior? I actually think the more damage for me is that we are not having conversations like this, because I think it's okay to accept. Let me use a different example. You know, when you look at violence in South Africa, it is unrealistic to expect that that society could have transformed without going through violence. In other words, the violence that is going on now, because over the years, they internalized the perpetration of violence as the norm. What is damaging is that there is no conversation by intellectuals to identify where this thing comes from, what the causes are, and then to come up with solutions of how to combat it. And I think at an Africa level, we're doing the same. We're not systematically identifying why we are where we are, which is inevitable because of where we came from. But if we don't have the conversation and identify it and accept it and then say, what are we going to do to change it? We're never going to change it.
You see, it's a very tricky thing. I even don't think we are very ignorant about that.
You don't think so?
No. You see, even with the absence of a conversation like that, you see, you can learn from a conversation, or you can learn from what happens to you, or what has happened to you. Because if we go out there and can study other situations and understand them, what is it that stops us understanding our own situation? is something I can't understand. Oh, and things that we experience every day. You see? Something that has happened. For example, I keep asking myself, and we have a conversation here with our people. It's like, how can the history of Rwanda and what we have gone through not teach us a lesson? How? How can we have a genocide here, so many people die, others get involved in the killing, and this is all wasted. Nobody learns from it. How? That's not human. Something must.
So what is it?
I don't know. at least I will say from a small experience. Here we have this conversation. We have had this conversation for the last 20 years. And I think some of the progress that has taken place here is because of that.
The conversation is happening.
Oh, yes. And then learning from what has happened, not what has happened in other situations. That one we learn from as well, but we start with our own. We can't run away from it. The tragedy of Rwanda is our own. We've been part of it, if you will. So we can't go looking for solutions elsewhere before we start looking for them here.
My takeaway, Mr. President, is that I can take solace from the fact that you say part of the solution came from the conversation, which is what I'm suggesting, that Africa needs to have a conversation, an honest, inside conversation amongst ourselves. Because when we are with outsiders, we cannot have that conversation, rightly so. But the trouble is that we are not creating the space and time to have an internal and honest conversation.
Absolutely, I agree with you, and I think you said it earlier, and you see, even thinking that somebody will come and address your problem, is part of it, because on one hand, as we sit and talk about these problems, then when we go out and go to our countries and our places, either of work or wherever we live, we leave that collective responsibility, we forget about it.
Somebody else must do it.
We go back to our small places and communities, and that's where the competition happens and ends. You see? Yeah. So the more we talk about this, the more we get together, the more and the more we are able to accept responsibility for these failures and not keep saying it is somebody else who caused it. We've seen it. Yeah. We've seen, we have had these discussions, even poverty or conflicts or everything. It's like people caught up in it, supposed to manage that. Sometimes they keep pointing fingers elsewhere. It's the other one who doesn't wish me well. It's the other one who, comes by the night and causes problems here, and by the day he has crossed the border and is on the other side, and the whole thing gets lost in that. There is not saying, okay, even if this one is part of my problem,
what can I do?
What can I do, and why don't I first deal with my part of the problem that I am actually responsible for, not anybody else? So if we can't identify what is it that is really a problem coming from us, and then what is it that comes from somebody else, disaggregate this. At the end of the day, you got to bring all that back together and say, because that's the whole problem you have to deal with. But you can't dismiss everything. You see, yes, or keep postponing it and thinking somebody, why does somebody owe you anything anyway? I keep telling our people here, we may wait for another 100 years before we develop. If we keep thinking that these foreign taxpayers owe us anything, you know, you imagine that a European taxpayer in his country actually is responsible for your development, and you believe it. Why? Why does somebody else somewhere?
Yeah.
Why do they have to pay tax for people to come and feed you here? Why? You just ask yourself that question. And we believe it and sit back and wait for it.
Yeah.
It's absolutely
ununderstandable.
Yes.
Can I just take you, because of Rwanda, again, these 20 years, and we're talking to young people, what we say to them is that they've got a responsibility to conceptualize in their minds the kind of Africa they would like to see, which means they have to have capacity, almost like an architect, to look 10, 20 years henceforth and say, I want an Africa which has got these attributes in that time. And then come back to today, to the reality, and say, these are the steps I'm going to take in this time frame to get to there. That's the journey, the issue of planning. Often I get the impression that we are not very good at, firstly, planning with clarity. Where do I want to be in 10 years' time? Where am I starting from? What are the intervals that I'm going to use to review where I've got to, what I've achieved, and what I need to change? But clearly, the fact that this country has gotten to where you've got to, planning must have been one of the key issues, and the clarity and the review over time to say, in the next 12 months we're going to do this. When that 12 months is gone, we can look back and see whether we've achieved, not achieved, and so on.
Absolutely.
Maybe you could share some of that with us.
What I can share with you is sometimes you don't have to complicate things. You make them as simple as you can, even when they have a huge meaning. And we try to put our understanding of what needs to be done in this country and the future we want and how we need to get there in a very simple language, that has to be understood by everyone, because everyone has to be part of it. Yes. So we don't come and speak in languages that people will not even understand. You may come and address a big gathering of your own citizens, and they clap for you because you are a president and you wanted to have around with them. You see, even when we know that what the problem is, you go to the communities there and you also ask them what they think is the problem.
Yeah.
Together you understand the problem. Next step is, but where do we want to be? I'm putting planning and everything else aside a little bit. Is what the situation is now, but I may ask somebody and say, but where do you really want to be? In 10 years, what do you think about where we need to be or should be? Well, they may look around other places and say, why don't we become like the other ones? They have this, they have that. These are things we need. You say, fine. But how do we get there? How do we get
from here,
this problem, to where we have agreed we need to go? Then that's where really the planning comes in. Yes, you need to understand how you get there, and how the resources you have available, and the organization and responsibilities of everyone at different levels. And this conversation in a simple language is understood by these ordinary people. And then you don't want to take things for granted that because you have discussed it, therefore it is understood by everybody, and then you go back and you say, I will come back after 5 years. No. You go back and check, say, we have an arrangement here, what we call imihigo, the performance contracts we have had with the mayors of districts and with the central government and so on. This is what they expect from the central government. And there's also what the central government says, we will give you what you expect from us, but we also expect you address those problems. So together we've worked out how we check this development and hold accountable each other by going back every quarter and saying, okay, we agreed this was the problem, this is what was needed to be done, the resources that were going to be availed, whether through collections of the central, the decentralized districts, or from central government. Was money given? Was it given in time? So was this money spent where we agreed it needed to be spent? So what are the results? So that you don't have to wait for 5 years, and by the time you go back, you find actually nothing was done. So this is what we've been doing, and it has worked. And let me tell you one thing, which in modern societies has even become confused a little bit. I'll tell you, for example, the criticisms we come under, it's very important to know. It's like in Rwanda, things happen, but you see, they are a bit hard on people. It's like they should let people do what they want to do. Fine. Sometimes the line between letting people do whatever they want to do and really finding ways for people to do what they need to do is extremely thin. But the reasoning and the logic of it can also be argued like this. And we are not saying these things from experience. It's not theoretical. It's not just hearsay or anything. If you design and you have agreed with the people what needs to be done, what the problem is, what is good for them, and it has come from them, even with that good understanding, when you leave and don't go back to check or to hold each other accountable,
nothing happens.
Don't be surprised, nothing happens. It's not just the expression of goodwill and understanding that does things. So sometimes, in fact, even in the management itself, there is checking, there is holding each other accountable, there is a little push, reminders and so on and so forth, which constitutes some kind of pressure, even in people's minds, and they start acting based on that. While if you don't practice that, you'll find the majority of people, each one will start saying, oh, somebody else will do it. Somebody else will do it. In the end, nobody does it. Yeah. Yeah. But the good thing is, you may practice that kind of push for some time, up to a point when people actually internalize this and know it is in their best interest.
It becomes a habit.
And it becomes a habit. Yeah. Yes, you no longer need to enforce it. But at a certain point, there's some kind of enforcement that goes on. Not just expecting that, well, you can expect goodwill from an individual, from the other, from 2, from 10, but to expect that from a society and say, well, they understand it, so they will do it.
Well, in school we write exams regularly, don't we?
Yes,
it's similar thing. Yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is what has been happening. So, but again, you don't just push without having clearly designed, you have policies in place that are intended to achieve something and that have been contributed to by the people themselves who are going to be affected. You also design processes. How are you going to, policies? Yeah. Policies. And processes, and then you expect results. So you keep, monitoring the results. Yeah. And if the results are not happening the way they should happen, then you need to go back and keep checking through the system. How are things happening? It's just as simple as that. It's like somebody, has a heart problem. Is given a medicine. The doctor gives a medicine.
Yeah.
The doctor keeps listening, on
See, yeah.
on the heartbeat, whether
not, yeah.
is the medicine really doing the right thing or not. Yes. So it's as simple as that. And if you put this in a simple language to every citizen, they will understand it. And they will understand it and link it with the needs they have. If that understanding connects directly with the problem this citizen has, they will participate.
Okay.
Yes.
That's, before I open it up, just one last question, which again it appears to me this country is managed incredibly well. So, I spent some time in Washington at IFC. I spent some time at the ADB in Tunis. And the relationship between African countries and development partners is a challenging one, in the sense that, there is an expression in English which says, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Mm-hmm. And in most African countries, it appears to a lot of us that when people give you money, they tend to enforce their agenda rather than accept yours. Mm-hmm. How have you managed this?
It's, I think sometimes we need to be stubborn to do things and get results. But you can be stubborn and reasonable at the same time.
And if you are credible.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
this is what you need to do. Because what we have done, we knew all these problems. That's the very old saying you put to us. Even starting from that, we know. And we start from understanding this is our problem. But there's somebody there who is saying, well, I can help. That's fine. But we must have a dialogue. At the end of the day, the problem we are addressing is mine. I'm the one being affected. So how the problem gets addressed and how fast it gets addressed is more in my interest than yours, actually.
Yeah.
Now, so we right from the beginning, we understood this, and we tried to raise it with our partners and said, look, we really appreciate your support. It's very vital, it's very important. But at the end of the day, if you give us this kind of support and it results into dependency, then we're not addressing the problem. We want to be assisted to own our problems and our solutions. And in fact, we told them, there is no conflict. If you are supporting me, if you are giving me money, first of all, what are you giving me this money for? It's not because I have done anything for you. It's not a job I have done.
Yeah, you're not paying.
You're not paying.
Yeah.
So you are assisting. If you are assisting, then my job is to make sure and convince you that the money you gave me assisting me was actually useful to the people you intended to have their problem addressed.
Yeah.
That's the only satisfaction you should be getting from that money. And so we will do our best, and we even allow you to come and hold us accountable to make sure that the money you gave us, if it was going for education, education